Hey everybody! So fun fact, when I tell people that I am a public speaking coach, usually the first reaction is, wow, I need that. Or I know somebody who needs that. And they start to tell me about how they want to book speaking engagements or they want to be a better public speaker and they know that it is really important to their work. And so my question is always, what you waiting on? How come you haven't started? Let's get going. If 2021 is your year to really launch into public speaking, to really grow your thought leadership through public speaking, to show up in spaces where you know you belong, my program will be exactly for you. Make sure you join my list at bit.ly/Rhonda's list. I will be announcing it to my list first before anyone else, and I want you to have the opportunity to join. Again, that's bit.ly/Rhonda's list. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to Oversharing with Rhonda, a podcast to amplify the voices of trailblazing women. My name is Rhonda Khan, and I believe in the power of authenticity, vulnerability, and storytelling to connect the masses. As a public speaking coach, speech therapist, performer, mom, and chronic oversharer, I'm often empowering others to own their stories. And what I found is that the most transformative change happens when we share our journeys while being unapologetically ourselves. Hey everybody. So this is episode 5. I cannot believe that I am here, that we are here. I want to first take the time to thank everybody for listening, for putting me on in your car, on your walk, while you're feeding your baby, while you're doing your dishes. That's when I listen to podcasts. It means so much. I've had friends reach out and say, I really like this episode, and friends listening means everything. And also people that I don't even know. I completely forgot, y'all, that I registered this podcast on Amazon because you can listen to me on audible.com, by the way. I completely forgot about that. And then I happened to Google Oversharing with Rhonda on Amazon. I just Googled Oversharing with Rhonda and Amazon popped up. And I was like, oh, I forgot. I was on Amazon. So I want to thank everybody for listening. So I have re-recorded this introduction so many times. Let me just overshare about that right now. Because I'm still a baby podcaster. Yes, I'm a public speaking coach. Yes, I speak for a living and I talk all day. But I'm just in a space of overthinking and overdoing things sometimes. And I just kept doing it. So instead of doing that, I'm going to speak to you today. And I want you to take this lesson as well of like, hey, let go of that perfection. Let go of it all and just talk to the people. Sometimes that's what we have to do. I am thrilled about this episode today because we are going to dive deep into identity. I believe that identity is incredibly important to expressing who we are in the world. It starts from where we came from, where our people are from, what is our culture, who do we define ourselves as in this world. One of my favorite Audre Lorde quotes is, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies of me and eaten alive. And I don't know about you, but I first heard this quote from the wonderful movie, The Best Man, when I was about 17 or 18 years old, whenever it came out. I think 17. And if you don't know the movie, it's when Murch, which is Harold Perrineau's character, and Candy, Regina Hall's character, are out talking after the bachelor party. And he shares this quote with her. And she's like, oh, my goodness, that's Audre Lorde. And they have this moment. And, 17-year-old, I think I'm so cultured and deep, Rhonda was like, yes. But didn't know much about what it really meant. But that quote always stuck with me. And I recently looked it up. It is from her address. I think it's called A Letter to the 60s or A Note to the 60s. She did this speech in 1982, and she was talking about her intersecting identities and how she doesn't really fit into multiple boxes as a mother, as a woman, being Black, queer, so many other things. So when I checked it out, I was like, wow, that is so very relevant to so many people, how we have so many intersections and how people want to put us in a box, but we may not fit into those boxes, or maybe people may not want us to fit in their box. Recently, very recently, obviously we've had an election since our last episode, and there was the breakdown of who voted for whom, right? Culturally, as we always know. And some things were disappointing, but not surprising. I'm not going to get that deep into it because I'm trying to keep it light, but you know who continued to vote for Trump and despite everything that happened, but we're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it light. So, but what many people who didn't know what's up were surprised is that the Latino vote, especially in Florida, I believe, was surprisingly more for Trump than Biden in some counties, in many counties, and across different parts of the country. And people were like, what? Why? But how come that didn't understand the complexities of the community? And there were a lot of different really wonderful educated people in the Latinx community that were like sharing, like, here is why, and here's what it is, and Latinos are not a monolith, blah, blah, blah. And there was a lot of discussion on my Twitter about like, what? Okay, so I've learned this and I've learned that. And a lot of learning was taking place. And I couldn't help but to think inside of this conversation about the Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx community. That is, people who identify as both Latino or Latinx and Black. There are multiple terms that fall under this umbrella, and my guest today is going to break it all the way down. But I thought about that community because I do know that this community is not amplified the way it should be, is not seen and heard the way it should be, and should absolutely be in the forefront. And there are multiple reasons why. My guest today is a person who is from that community, and she's going to talk about her journey and how she got to being a person who amplifies those voices, especially for women who are of, as she describes it, Black and Latin American descent. Janel Martinez is a multimedia journalist and the founder of an award-winning blog, Ain't I Latina, an online destination celebrating Afro-Latinx womanhood. The Bronx, New York native is a frequent public speaker discussing media, culture, and identity, as well as diversity at conferences and events for Bloomberg, NBCU, South by Southwest, Harvard University, and more. She's appeared as a featured guest on national shows and outlets such as BuzzFeed, Essence, NPR, and Sirius XM. And her work has appeared in Adweek, Univision Communications, Oprah Magazine, Remezcla, and the New York Times. Her work will be included in the forthcoming book, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. Janel Martinez, welcome to Oversharing with Rhonda.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for having me.
Of course. So, when did you discover that writing was a way that you wanted to engage with the world?
That's such a great question. For me, I always try to think back, like, when did I really start writing? And I will say very early on when it came to like book reports, and my parents actually were those type of parents that were like, even if you don't have homework, like, especially in the summers, like, we're going to make up some homework for you. And oftentimes it correlated with like reading a book and writing about it. And I just thought that was part of like work itself. But it wasn't until I want to say seventh grade, my seventh grade teacher mentions both to myself and my mom and was like, you know, you're a really strong writer. And I never beforehand thought about that. I was just like, you know, this is just part of, again, like the education system. And when she told that to me, I was like, you know, maybe she's onto something. Like, I had never, to be honest, thought about it prior to. And it was at that point in my, I guess, academic journey where I started taking writing a bit more seriously, and particularly in high school. I will say in high school, the classics that we have to read and what we have to write about didn't always correlate with my passions. I was always really into like magazines. Like I loved Vibe Vixen. You remember Vibe Vixen, right? I and it was only like 4 issues, which I'm so mad about, but like, that was my magazine. Was really into like hip hop journalism from, of course, a consumer standpoint. Essence, Latina, like these were things that I was always like reading through. But again, as a young girl, didn't know what that journey looked like to being able to write for those types of platforms and outlets. So it was after high school, when I was applying to college, realizing that I wanted to do something in media, but again, still had no clue. And it was really when I was on campus at Syracuse and writing for what is called the Black Voice, which was the only, outlet speaking to the Black diasporic experience on Syracuse campus. And we also covered things in the larger Syracuse community that I was like, oh yeah, I really like doing this. And I definitely want to, pursue this on a professional level. And I think that's the transition and trajectory from like not realizing that writing was like a part of my journey to, oh, you're actually good at that, to being like, all right, this is what I'm actually going to do. So it's been an interesting journey for sure, but that's kind of what it looked like. Yeah.
Wow. I love how the direction of that journey, because as a small child, as a young child, other people were like, you have this gift. This is something that's really unique that you can do. And you're like, yeah, I should kind of look into it. And so you started to embrace it and started to listen. And then what really drove it home was when you started to write about things that mattered to you at Syracuse, right? Like you had the Black publication that was there, and you were like, I really care about this. And I also really love to write. This is it. Like, this is the connection, which is amazing because it takes people a long time to really create those intersections. And you were like, I got it. I figured it out.
Yeah. And I really feel it's very divine. Sometimes speaking to that journey, like who would have known that like I would have made those connections and I would have even had some of the opportunities that I had early on, like, actually listening to what my teacher said. And then also my mom being like, yeah, no, you always have been a strong writer, right? And then being on campus and really positioning myself to write more. But particularly, like you mentioned, stories that matter to me, because I did go to a predominantly white institution, but thankfully, it was through outlets like the Black Voice. Also, I wrote for La Voz, which is more the Latinx, side of things. And, being a Black woman of Latin American descent in the States, just finding home and community on campus through different organizations and stuff like that further propelled me into like community work and using my pen and now my keyboard as a way of shedding light on our stories and issues that matter to us.
Love it. Mm-hmm. So you just identified yourself as a woman of Black and Latin descent. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Black woman of Latin American descent.
A Black woman, let me get it right. So you identified yourself as a Black woman of Latin American descent. And you write about just that. You write about that and more, identity and culture. What has been your experience navigating being in this America, having those identities?
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? I was just having a conversation with someone, also a Black Latina, recently, and I think it's very much so layered, right? Growing up, so my parents both were born. My mom came here earlier than my father, but from Honduras, right? And specifically, their ethnicity is Garifuna, which is an Afro-Indigenous language and group of people across the Caribbean coast of Central America, particularly Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize. And it's a beautiful journey, of course, one of a lot of resilience, because from St. Vincent and the British ousting us from there. And that's how we ended up there. It's just crazy. But growing up, I had a very strong understanding of that identity. In terms of like food, in terms of like bits of the history that my parents knew, the music. It wasn't until I had to leave through schooling, through other means, my home, that people would question my identity, right? And so I think no matter how you identify, but particularly as someone that is Black, you know, a Black child in the US, there's certain things that you have to navigate. And I think identity for me was a big one because I got a lot of questions. Not that your last name signifies, you know, exactly your background, but because my last name is Martinez, that was definitely a signal to people like looking at me, then understanding my last name and then it sparking questions. So I always, you know, been racialized as a Black person, you know, in the States, but it just so happened that my parents, because of colonization and things like that, ended up in Honduras and then, you know, migrating here for, you know, this quote unquote American dream, better life. And so really my existence was like navigating their experience, but then me being born and raised in the Bronx and navigating that here, navigating pride in Blackness, but then also having to understand, like, is it African Americanness? Like, all of these different things had to come up. And it really wasn't until, again, college, which I think is a huge privilege because not everybody has the opportunity to go to college. Not everyone, you know, has the opportunity to go to, you know, a private institution, and taking African American studies. And that was my minor, essentially. It was when I had the opportunity to study abroad and met and learned about, like, those that basically expatriate community in France, like African Americans that were, you know, then there, and like the cultural movement there, and like how that then existed back when I did my study abroad program, and dissecting Blackness there. I'm like, if people can be Black in France, how can people not be Black, you know, in all these different areas and be affirmed in that? And so I know that is a lot, but I say all that to say that that really crystallized for me the terminology. That's when I discovered Afro-Latina. I will say 10 years later, though I do use that term, I definitely feel like there's been a shift in the visibility of it, and also the conversation, and also like who is using the term. And so for me, I definitely just always want to put Black to the front of that identity, because it doesn't matter if you saw me in Honduras, if you saw me in Barbados, if you saw me on the continent, you know I'm a Black woman. And it doesn't matter, you know, specifically the origin, but that existence is paramount. And so that's just something that I make sure to emphasize, because there are nuances. But of course, many of us, when you look at like health disparities, when you look at like communities, there's a lot of parallel between, you know, our existence, whether it's like land grabs in Honduras or gentrification in Harlem or the Bronx. Like there's definitely, again, a lot of like overlap. So for me, it's really important that I center, you know, the Blackness. And yes, there's many terms I can use, but definitely Black women, negra, whatever term that's going to, you know, just really bring that to the forefront.
Yeah. For some reason, I'm impulsively wanting to say Black, blackity, black, black.
Yes. Honestly, black everywhere. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm so glad thank you for sharing all of that and your really, really powerful journey. And I love also, there is a privilege of going to college. And I feel like for Black women, for people of color, for marginalized groups that get that experience, it's such a cultivation of who you are. If let's say you've attended a predominantly white institution, I also did, or let's say you attended an HBCU, which sometimes I get jealous that I didn't, I go between,
I
right? Like, oh, but y'all had, but in all of those spaces, you really are confronted with exploring who you are in some kind of way. And I think that's really powerful that was the space where you were like, okay, well, where do I fit and what happens? You brought up the terms, which is what I really want to get into. And I am African-American, Black. My ancestors were brought here from different places, but to be slaves in this United States. And so that is my experience. And I think I mentioned this to you before when we spoke, where the first Afro-Latina friend I had was in high school, and she was from New York, and we were at a debate camp together. And which is, totally nerdy. We're at a debate camp together. And I assumed, because in the Midwest, specifically, I mean, obviously there are, communities of Black and Latin American descent in Chicago, where I'm from, but it's not in the plentiful amounts that is in New York. Like New York, the Bronx, or the tri-state area, very much you are able to access that community a lot more than other parts of the country. And so I feel like a lot of people of the Black community that grew up, that are African-American, may or may not know what that conversation fully is, although they see other Black people. And you mentioned that Afro-Latina is a term that you have used, but you're starting to put Black to the forefront. So let's define, what is Afro-Latina or Afro-Latinx?
Yeah, no, and I think that's an important question, and something I think is important for me to note. When someone uses the term Afro-Latina, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latino, those terms mean Black, because I know sometimes I see, especially because my lane is media, I've seen people say Black and Afro-Latinx, and I'm like, that's like saying Black and Black, right? Because it's a given that when you're putting the Afro in front of, what Latinx being considered an ethnicity, that you're saying essentially that it's Black. Just as if someone's saying African-American, Black from, North America. What the term Afro-Latina or Afro-Latina, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latino is a person of Latin American descent with significant African or Black ancestry, right? It is a term that when I came across it, and I'm aging myself, but this was like 2008, where for me, at least, it was a term that was like, no mistakes here. Like, this is Black existence via Latin America. It also, I think, is important to kind of note that I oftentimes think that people's perception of the term is that this means that you have one parent that is of Latin American descent, may not even be Black, but one parent. And then you have a parent that is of African American ancestry, and they came together and they had this like Black child. And I think it's important to note that, like, many of us who use the term, we have parents that are Black, both of them being of Latin American descent. Again, just being the fact that, like, because of the transatlantic slave trade or whatever someone's story is, that's how they got there. And both of their parents are Black. There are some situations where one parent, depending upon, again, where a person is from, one parent is Black, another person may be mixed, but the child is Black, and it's very clear and uses the term. There are also people who have one parent that is African American and one parent that is Black of Latin American descent and use the term. And so I think that there's many kind of entry points to the term, but it was designed to center, Black folks of Black ancestry that just so happen to come from Latin America. The reason why, as of late, though I use the term, I have been more critical of the term is because, as with anything, it's more visible, and it's kind of seen now as like, oh, this is like this new term, and like people who don't necessarily embody the existence of being Black have found it convenient to take it on and sort of center themselves, taking away from, again, the always been Black people of Latin American descent here in the States. And so for me, again, I still use the term because I think it's significance in it. It's important. I know what it meant to find that term and be like, wow, like I've always known that I'm Black, but like here is a term that really speaks to my existence. However, identity is not fixed. It's something that is continuously, with new information, expands. And so at this very place that I'm in now, I use it, but I prefer, I just say like I'm a Black woman. And then if people have more questions, we can talk a little bit more about my, I guess, lineage. But I think for me, that's where I'm at right now with things.
I love that you said that identity is not fixed. And I think that is very liberating for a lot of us Black people, marginalized, like people of color, all the terms, because there are overlaps. And you live in this existence of so many identities overlapping and all the possibilities that can happen. And I think we are able to say whatever we want to be if we identify with that. Like my experience right now, especially with recent events, and I wanted to get your take on this. I feel like I'm going to do an episode about this preview, but the term women of color. And it's a term that I'm like, I don't know what's better. I struggle with that very recently, although I do also identify as a woman of color. Now we have BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous person of color. And I feel like it doesn't slap just yet. I mean, people are just now catching on. And I get the point of it too, because especially the fact that Indigenous voices are not being heard and seen, and we need to incorporate that. But it just is so complicated. And I have struggled just in identity of like my business and my work, and I work with everyone, but I do have a very specific conversation with non-white women that I don't have. And within those non-white women, I also have specific conversations with people who identify as Black. And so I'm like, should I write Black and women of color? Should I write BIPOC? BIPOC is not hitting with me just yet. People are still confused about it. But I'm like, I've been intentional about saying I am Black first and a woman of color. Like I've actively started to do that. And some people have been like, well, like I've gotten a little bit of, okay. And I'm sure that I'm looking at your face and I'm sure you have some words. How do you feel like you identify in terms of women of color, being Black, Afro-Latina, like all of that? And I know it's not fixed. So where are you in that conversation?
Yeah, I love that you asked this, because I feel like the last couple months have really forced people to re-examine terms, conversations, because of the racial tensions that we've been in. And they're not new. Something to point out, these are not new conversations, but I think people really are like, want to re-examine. For me, please call me a Black woman. Like there is no need to tiptoe, because I feel like when we do WOC, women of color, POC, there's a lot of tiptoeing. I've seen people use the terms when everybody is Black. So why are we using that term? Just say Black people. We have Black people right here, and I think it's important to note, like, there's race and then there's also like ethnicity. Mm-hmm. And because we know that things are not fixed, there can be overlap. So in my case, when people talk about like, and this is something I will be transparent that I not even struggling with, but more so is a conversation that people are not receptive to. When we look at the terms POC, women of color, I'm seeing people that are white included in that, simply because of their ethnicity. So like when we look at the Latinx space, there are white Latinxes that in their respective countries, nobody is confusing them for any person of color, and they have an extreme amount of privilege. They come to the US, and because of opportunities around scholarships or whatever, employment opportunities, they then, because the context has changed, people are centering their ethnic background. And it's like, no, that is a white person, and you probably know that as well. So why in that case is that person, and I'm just throwing this question out there, but like, why is that person considered a POC, a WOC, when they have structural privilege over Indigenous people who are literally like clearly Indigenous, Black folks that are clearly Black, right? I think we're not at a place where we're being critical about the hierarchy even that exists within terms like POC and women of color and BIPOC. I'm glad that the term exists, though it's been slow to adapt, right? I think people are kind of like, where'd this term come from? Like, why are we using this now? But I do think no matter the term that we decide to use, we got to be real about, like, even amid using these umbrella terms, who are we talking about and who is unfortunately at the bottom of that? Because in conversations, I really feel like it's a lot of tiptoeing. It's a lot of, we got to be safe. So let's say, let's use this term, but it's like, my lived experience is going to be different than an Asian woman's experience. My lived experience is going to be different than a Latina that you're unclear on her background. You might deem her as racially ambiguous. You looking at me, you're not. There's no hesitation. Like, you're very clear, that I am a Black woman. So it's like, when it comes to the office space or professional, I should rather say, when it comes to the professional space, when it comes to entrepreneurial space, when it comes to like all of those conversations, we are gonna be received differently. And I think that there is privilege in that. And so how are we, when we think of these terms, acknowledging that within?
Mic drop. Girl, this is a whole class. And I feel like I want to record this and send this out and have this. And maybe I'll invite you back because I want to have a whole conversation about that. I was talking to many of my friends who are POCs that are, some are Black, some are not Black. And we're constantly having these conversations to navigate, because it's hard to, it's something to navigate. I'll just say that. And without a doubt, you are Black, I am Black. This is how we age in the world as Black women, regardless of our whatever it is. And we're going to experience the world differently than some of our POC counterparts that do not look and experience and live like us, just bottom line.
Right. And also, what I will say to that too, another reality that people don't want to face, when there's those that have, again, are at the top of the pyramid with the terminologies, the moment that they get to flex in that and get an opportunity in that, they jump at that, right? We don't even have that ability. Okay. They're able to be like, okay, I'm here, I'm POC, I'm good, I'm here for this program, whatever it is, right? But the second that the larger or dominant culture says, oh, POC or whatever the context is, they are quite fine with assimilating and being in that. And so because that exists, that is happening, I don't even want to be a part. I just want to say, like, let's just be real.
Don't invite me.
Right. Like, don't invite me out. Please. Like, let's just be very real about it.
I hear that. Yes. They will flex, girl. Okay. Speaking of flexing and showing love to all, again, I want to make this said for myself. Like, I do appreciate so much of my friends who are non-Black people of color that are actively working toward change, supporting. And I do understand that we all have our individual struggles. However, I know that your work specifically is about amplifying Black voices within the Latin American community. And I know that there's a reason why you've chosen to, and it's necessary to amplify these voices, because these voices haven't been heard. These stories haven't been told. Why is it so hard for people to embrace, and this is my observation, Black people being of Latin American descent? Why is that so hard?
I think that there's a few reasons why people struggle with understanding Blackness, for one, outside of a North American context, or even the continent, right? I find people are like, oh yeah, like they'll know, they can grasp that. But for some reason, I think when it comes to specifically Spanish speaking countries, because like Latin American countries are comprised of some that don't necessarily speak Spanish, but I think that that's where I find people to be a little bit stuck. I think there's a few reasons. I think this is clearly the result of enslavement, colonization, right? Like the fact that we are from the same place, and by force and brutality, we were ripped apart and placed in different areas. Like that's by design. And so like when it comes to like the unification or understanding, like we're all from the same place, and yes, because of that schism, if you will, there are certain cultural things that are different. But like, and I only use this example because I think it's helpful. I don't want to like limit the conversation to like making comparisons around food or some of these other things, but it really is an example of why like you can have like red beans and rice, right, in New Orleans, but you're also having similar dish, in Latin America, beans and rice. On the continent, you're having jollof, right? Although there's no beans in that, to my understanding, but you know what I'm saying? Like rice is a staple, know, yuca is a staple, plantains are a staple, like things like that. That is for sure one indicator. I also think too, and this is something that like I haven't no like extreme build out around this particular point, but when this does tend to come up, I always think about the fact that like for many of us, particularly, and I don't want to speak for all African Americans, but when there are conversations around like, oh, y'all don't even all like identify as Black. Well, for one, we're not all Black, right? But there are those of us that do identify as Black. And even amid that, there's still some sort of like but still you're not that our kind of Black. And I think that really boils down to the fact that like Blackness is, for many of us, is something that we know we can own, right? This is our culture. This is near and dear to us. We have been stripped of a lot of other things, but we have our Black culture, right? And so when someone else who is of the culture, but maybe their starting point is a little different, it's like, who are you? Like, where are you coming from? And so I think that like, that is a part of the conversation that isn't always easy to have, because it's like, like if we're talking about diasporic Blackness, like it doesn't matter where you come from, because just the way that people are being murdered in the US, and that has been caught on camera numerous times, there's murders happening across Latin America in the same brutality and manner, right? So again, that Black condition is universal, no matter where you're coming from. And so I think that like we're by design not taught this information, right? In our history books, we are not given opportunities to experience Blackness beyond our starting point. Whether you're, again, here in the US or, in certain cases in Latin America, like, or the continent, you may not have that access to engage with people that are Black from other areas. But by all means, it's important to note that people who are of Latin American descent that are racialized as Black have a lot of pride in that and are very clear on the fact that they're Black. But I think sometimes when we have this US conversation of it, it definitely gets kind of thrown to the side.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Latinx community that does not identify as Black. And I know that in the past 4 or 5 years, and this should not have been the first time, or not the first time, but this has been a really notable time. I don't watch the show, but Love and Hip Hop Amara La Negra shows up in all her blackness, and she gets so much resistance from her castmates, and just it creates this whole conversation. And then even recently with the Emmy nominations, I feel like there was a conversation about not enough Latinos being nominated or just seen, but there have been, like what was the young man? Is it
Jarrell Jerome?
Jarrell Jerome from When They See Us, which I know he did great. I didn't watch it because I can't. I got a little brown boy. I can't. I can't.
Yeah. I saw parts of it. I can't.
Yeah, I saw the original documentary, and so I know the story. But I'm just like, I don't need that triggering right now. But I know he did a phenomenal job and deserved all the accolades. But like, he got nominated, and there are other people in the space. But all of a sudden, it was like, well, there are no and Afro-Latino, Latinx, Black people of Latin American descent are left out of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that still happening, and how can it change?
Yeah. Again, a very layered one. So for one, I think that like the erasure of Black Latinxes from conversations to begin with is very much so a result of the racist systems that we operate within. It's definitely by design, right? The fact that when we think of particularly Hollywood, we think of like the entertainment industry, it's very much aligned with Eurocentric beauty standards and ideals. And when we even think about like the African-American journey within, that context, though there are accolades and awards, like it's still relatively new, right? I think even within that, it's important to note that there could very well have been in the last 50 or so years, Afro-Latinxes that just were ID'd as African-American, that were awarded things or that have been recognized because of, paperwork or whatever the case may be, right? So that's something to point out that actually in the Twitter conversations that were happening, a young woman by the name of Marjola, she had commented on a comment that I made mentioning that. And I think that's important to note because it is true. Like, we don't know. But again, this erasure is happening because it is beneficial to erase Black folks. It's how the system has been operating, I think when it comes to Amara, and I actually often reference like her participation in season 1 of Love and Hip Hop because Young Hollywood, like from all of the Black folks that I know of Latin American descent, when they encountered or saw the show and saw Young Hollywood, it was very clear. They were like, oh, I know many Young Hollywoods, right? People who will be like, deny you of your existence. I think Miami is a very interesting place. I can't speak to that dynamic fully, but growing up in New York City, of course, there were some elements of erasure, but you're going to see a different level of erasure in Miami specifically. Amara, who is unambiguously Black, has an Afro-textured hair, curvaceous, beautiful dark skin, but just so happens to be Dominican and speaks Spanish. That even, I think the biggest thing, and I shouldn't be shocked because we see it all the time, but the fact that like people were arguing in comments and threads and saying like, oh my gosh, she needs to start with spray tanning or like darkening her. They said that she was taking pills. They were saying that she has a wig. And yes, she could be wearing an Afro texture wig. And we wear many types of wigs. Does that like negate the fact that she has Afro textured hair? Her eyes, which I mean, it could be brown, it could be that color, but whatever, she's still a Black woman. And so I think so often people are looking to have an investment in this quote unquote normative view of Latinx identity, which does not include Black people, that they are going to go to the extreme extent of denying someone who is of that existence a right to it. Which is why many people are divesting from even these terms, because it's like, who is it really serving? Who is it really centering? And so I think that that's really a big part of it. I want to speak to for sure the part around the Emmy nominations. John Leguizamo, who he's the person who started the tweet around, and in the LA Times, I thought that was a very horrible headline that they included, which was like, oh, you know, Black actors, and I'm paraphrasing here, Black actors make headway, Latinos still left behind. I was like, why would you pit two communities, or even some people that are within both communities? Why would you like kind of feed into that narrative? Mm-hmm. And then also John Leguizamo, I don't really expect more from him or anyone that looks like him, to be honest. I don't expect more. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not shocked. I do expect at this point more. Mm-hmm. So let me be clear with that. But what was sad to see about that conversation is, and I'm not really into movies like that, but people were even saying like John Leguizamo congratulated Jharrel Jerome last year. He, I believe, was in some sort of project with him. So how is it that you know Jharrel Jerome was the first Afro-Latinx person that we know of, at least on the record, that received an Emmy? But in that moment of rage, because for you, you're not talking about Jharrel Jerome. You're talking about Latinxes that look like you. So if you're not Black in Latinx, that's who he was talking about. And so that was a hot mess, because it's like, okay, like, thanks for being blatantly racist and discriminatory and doing your usual. But then what was sad, I will say, about that entire conversation was like women like Dasha and Selenis, who have never been invested in by Latinx identity, if you will, because they are light-skinned Black women, came to his defense.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me clarify for the people who don't know their last names and know who they are, Dasha, and tell me them.
Yeah, so Dasha Polanco is an actress. Many people know her from Orange is the New Black, but she's definitely been in other, projects. And Selenis Leyva is also a actress from Orange is the New Black and has been in this industry for a very long time and has been outspoken in saying she mainly gets casted. And Dasha, I believe this is the same for her, but I know for sure Selenis gets casted as a light-skinned Black woman, right? And to be honest, when you look at a lot of, and who knows what the terms they use to identify themselves, but when you look at Zoe Saldana, when you look at Gina Torres, when you look at a lot of these Afro-Latinx, they're in roles that are, usually seen as for African-American, right? Or they won't dissect or go into like their actual background, but that's what it is. And so it's important to note that, because, again, there is no investment in Dasha and Selenis when it comes to who John Leguizamo was talking about. So I found that very disheartening, because it's like, wow, how sad is it that both of y'all have been very vocal about, the erasure in this industry. But the moment this, well-known Latinx actor, producer has something to say, you're on that boat. And it's like, he's not even talking to you, to be honest. He's looking past y'all. So that's really unfortunate that y'all think that you would be included in that conversation.
That is unfortunate. I have heard Dasha Blanco speak in interviews saying, I'm a Black woman and this and that. Like, she identifies as a Black woman. And, remind me, Selenis, is that the one? I have to remember which one.
Leyva. So she
has short hair. Is that the one with short hair?
She has short hair.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Girl, I'm not on Twitter as often, but I did remember the conversation. But like, I trained as an actor, and so I'm very into acting. I have a solo show, and John Leguizamo is a person that I really studied, because he is, a phenomenal actor, phenomenal character actor, and he does one-person shows. And so I remember watching Ghetto Clown, one of his shows, and being like, oh, I want to create something like that. And, I did watch Orange is the New Black for a minute until it started to but that is very disappointing. what can we do now to, I know you are already doing things. You have your platform, Ain't I Latina, to amplify stories and voices. But what can we do more of now to really educate, create awareness, and amplify people of Black and Latin American descent?
Yeah, I will say, I feel like I'm one of a collective of voices that have been really trying to push this awareness and education to the forefront for now 10 years. And so I would say if you see, a Black Latinx person, creating content and awareness about this, please amplify. There are so many voices. I always think about like Bad Dominicana. I think about Dash Harris of Afro-Latino Travel, who they do trainings and has a trio, Caña Negra, which they have a podcast. There, and those are only two. And I wish I can I could throw out numerous lists. There's people who have been doing this work before social media. I think about like Dr. Marta Moreno Vega. I think about Yvette Modestine that has, books about this identity. And so please continue amplifying that type of work. I think particularly I was having a conversation with an elder who was like involved in the civil rights movement. That is a Black woman who worked on the side of civil rights, obviously African-American centered, but then also like diasporic centered, and specifically like just Latin American concerns. And so, she recounting her story to me, I was like, there's a lot of that still going on. And we're talking about, 40, 50 years ago. So for me, it's that we just got to keep propelling and pushing this information forward, because though social media amplifies this, it's definitely not new work. And so just doing more of like sharing the people that are on the ground doing this. I want to also emphasize the people that are in Latin America doing this work. I think, yes, I do tell the narrative that I know best and cover stories mainly in the US, but the Black Latinxes in Colombia, in Honduras, and all these places, they too, and shouting out, there's a young woman named Masi who is Garifuna, which I am as well, but she's based in Honduras. Like the work that she's doing, like we got to amplify those that are on the ground in these countries as well, because the work is continuous and it keeps happening. And I really want to urge white folks, particularly in this case, white Latinxes, to learn. I think we're not in a space where you can no longer say, oh, I didn't know that there were Black folks here. Well, yes, you did. They were in service industries, probably serving you maybe, and you didn't even like acknowledge that existence simply because of privilege. Those that are saying, oh, well, like this is a history that we didn't have access to. It is now accessible with the internet, right? Like there's courses around this stuff. So like, I want to urge white folk, particularly white Latinxes in this conversation, be, and I'm going to use in quotes, an ally, because I struggle with if that's even a real thing. But be an advocate if you can. Be an aware person at the bare minimum and do the work that's needed for yourself. Because you can no longer use the excuse that I didn't know. And so I think when we see, because we're always going to be doing this work, right? Mm-hmm. But when we see those that are deeming themselves as allies, being critical about how complicit these folks have been in the system, I think that once they recognize that and then also use the privilege that they have to amplify voices, to, even consider like letting go of that privilege, right? Yeah. That's when we'll see greater shifts, in my opinion. So that's what I would say. Like, please be a conscious citizen and do the work that's needed for yourself. and for the others in this case too.
Yes. Do the work. Y'all listening? No.
Right. Please listen. Okay. This is necessary as we move forward in this world.
Yes. I could ask you questions all day. I have one last question. It's a fun one. What is your personal theme song?
Oh, wow. Personal theme song. So I'll be honest, like most of the songs a lot of the songs I listen to are probably rated R, which is totally fine. I'm a grown Greek woman, right? So that's fine. And everybody listening to this is grown too.
I love it so much. I can't wait. What is it?
So now I'm thinking, because there's a few songs, but like one of my favorite songs, this woman is also Afro-Latina, a Leo. So what better way in Leo season? Khalees, who I feel like has been very out of the box. Mm-hmm. But she has the song Bossy. Mm-hmm. So that's like one of my like favorite. It's been my song for like years. I think since high school when she came out with it for me. So I was like, Bossy is one of them. There was another, dang, why did it just, there's just so many songs, but I'm going to stick with Bossy. But I will say I have many songs, even, it's not my theme song, but like we're a week or so off from the iconic release of Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B, WAP. Like, let's talk about that energy, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like I'm here for that song too, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So we're grown, and as grown women handling business, I think that, we have many dimensions. And so whatever song is on your playlist, I'm going to say Bossy is definitely when I need that like pick me up. But then also WAP is like a new thing where I'm like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like handling business.
I love it. I love it. Last question. First of all, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so good, and I could talk to you for 2 hours, and we will continue talking, obviously. Where can people stay in touch with you? Absolutely. So you can stay in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Janel, JANELM Rights. Also, Ain't I Latina, AINTI Latina on all social media platforms. And then also on my personal site, JanelMartinez.com. And then, of course, Ain't I Latina is AintILatina.com. Thank you so much, Janel. This has been a blast. Yes, thank you so much, Rhonda. This was so much fun. I am so grateful for this conversation. So many great quotes to digest and take forward. The first quote from Janel is that identity is not fixed. It's something that continuously expands. Oh, I gotta sit with that. Second, you must center yourself in the narrative if no one will, or if no one else will. Huge. How many times are our narratives not a part of the conversation, or we are not centered in the narrative? And the third is that for those of you who do not identify with whatever marginalized group, in this case, we're talking about the Afro-Latinx community, you need to be an advocate. You need to use your privilege to amplify that voice or those voices and create space for those conversations. So 2 questions I want to leave you with. How are you defining yourself? How are you reclaiming your narrative? And finally, how are you using your privilege to amplify voices? Please, please, please check out Janel's work and follow her at Janel M. Rights, or her platform at Ain't I Latina on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.